Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be Susan Rogers, the American professor, sound engineer and record producer, best known for being Prince's engineer during his commercial peak of the 80s, and worked on such albums as Purple Rain, Around the World, In a Day, Parade, Sign of the Times, and also the Black Album, and went on to work with such people as Barenaked Ladies, David Byrne, and lots more. Anyway, after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. Susan, it's over to you.
You know, I grew up in Southern California, and the great advantage there was that we had a lot of different radio stations. I was born in 1956, but when I was coming of age in the 60s, of course, in the radio station, we had the Beatles and the Stones and the Beach Boys, and they're all pretty damn good. So we heard great music on the radio, and that included the other bands that came along and didn't achieve that same level of success, but were cut from the same cloth. So we had my generation. We had the British invasion, and we had the surf scene, and so the 60s was big, but also we had Motown, yes. And we had James Brown coming up, and we had Stax, and we had the music coming out of the Golden Triangle of Memphis, Nashville, and Muscle Shoals. So we had that. And in Southern California, there was a variety of radio stations. So I and other people living there, we had a chance to get exposed to all that. As I got older and worked with musicians in the studio, I realized some of them who grew up way out in the country, they might be in the far reaches of New England, they might be in the Midwest, they might have just the one radio station, and they hear whatever that station plays, which can be rock or it can be oldies or whatever. So I'm very fortunate that I got exposed to what was out there in my early days, and discovered that that was the R&B and the soul music that appealed to me the most strongly.
Right, so there you go. I think I remember getting in the 80s this Atlantic box set and being very excited, and there was people like Jackie Wilson, and there was another record label called the Kent record label, Kent Records, and again that had a lot of very obscure 50s and 60s stuff, and then obviously Northern Soul, which was another kind of exciting sort of type of music, mostly one classic record by an artist, and then you never knew what else they did, but they had their one brilliant record. So did you have were your parents at all, did they have much influence on your life in those kind of formative years? I just wonder what their background was.
No, very, very little. My mother was originally from Ireland, coming up through Boston. And she would play Irish folk songs on the records when she could. My father just was a music lover who listened to whatever rock stations were available. But no, pretty much a non-musical household. My brothers were into sports and outdoor activities, so I was a little bit alone in that. Music just called to me, and I pursued it as an avid listener. My parents recognized that I seemed to love it a lot, so they bought a piano and gave me piano lessons. And I'm just one of those people. There are a lot of us who love music like crazy, but our chief attraction is in music listening. We don't cross that bridge and take up music playing or performance or songwriting. And all of my adult friends, they're all musicians, and they all did that. But I think I was born to be a record maker because I never felt like crossing that bridge. I liked being on the listening side of things.
Yes, well, yes, I can resonate with that one because I too had the occasional little lesson with the guitar, but never, would put it down, just put a record on, thinking this is so much easier to listen to it. And I would love to have been at that standard what you were listening to, but the pain of getting there was too much. So I was just always obsessed with discovering anything that was around that I might be missing out on, which was always that fear. Yeah, there would be that one record that would just be like, oh my God, from whatever genre as well. It wasn't particularly just one, it was just anything really that sparked that bit of, God, this is absolutely amazing.
I love that. For me, it was, and with other people too, it's discovering where the reward is. And for you, the reward was obviously in record collecting and knowing, being a part of the community, knowing who the bands are, knowing who's coming up, whose star is descending, what they're doing, what the hip stuff is. And all of us have our appetites. I didn't know what this was, but I knew that if I had a musical superpower, it was a capacity to do what I now know about neurologically, to be in touch with what I was experiencing as I listened to music, to be in touch with, in my book, I call it the listener profile, but to know the connection I'm having to this music and being able to express it and feel it. And it turns out a lot of my students at Berkeley, well, a good portion of them don't have that. They can play music, they can write it, they can sing it, they can perform it, they can analyze it for you. They can tell you what key it's in, but they can't tell you how they feel about it.
Right.
When I talk to my musician friends, typically what they say is that when they listen to music, they felt connected to it, but they would always describe wanting to modify it. Like, what part could I add that would make this record better? Or how could I play along with this record? If I were that guitar player, if I were that keyboard player, what would I do? And I never felt that. I think I was born to be a listener.
Yes, well, it's a good thing to have, actually, listening skills on many levels. Actually, did you, when you got to, what can you remember the first kind of record that you bought, or the first gig you went to? By the way, was there a particular moment where you saved up your $bucks and went, right, I'm going to the store, I've just heard this record, I'm going and I'm going to buy it. Don't stop me.
Well, when you're a little kid, you get whatever people decide to give to you, and that could be for better and for worse. You ask for records for birthday or Christmas or something, you may or may not get them. But when I had my own agency and had a little bit of money and could go and buy a record, I think the first one I bought was that first Crosby, Stills and Nash album.
Right. There you go. A classic, really. And did you, at that stage, because obviously you were just... the 60s was kind of happening in a very Technicolor sort of way. 67 was the summer of love. You had that event at Golden Gate Park with Country Joe and the Fish and Timothy Leary and Ginsberg and bits of the Grateful Dead happening. Were you kind of aware of that kind of culture going on, as well as kind of Vietnam and the race to get to the moon? Was that all part of your childhood? Because being the teen period, there was a great sense of kind of imagination.
I was aware of it. I was a little bit young at the time. Being born in 56, I would have been only 10 years old in 1966. So I was a little bit underneath the age limit there. And the other thing was that my mother was very ill in those years. She was ill with cancer for a very long time. I'm the only girl in the family, and I'm the oldest. So I was cooking and cleaning and minding the house from a very young age. So music was there in the background. But as far as ego-driven music, in other words, me deciding this music and I are going to have a relationship and I'm going to make a career out of it, that was just so far off the radar as to be non-existent, because I was so preoccupied with just helping out around the house. My mother passed away when I was 14, and it wasn't too long after that when I began realizing, okay, adult life is coming. And if there was no money for college, there was nothing. There was nothing. My brothers and I, we were on our own, whatever you can do for yourself. So I couldn't get a formal education, but I did what I thought was the smart thing to do. When I was 17 years old, I dropped out of school and I got married. And that ended up In hindsight, it worked out okay, but it ended up being not too smart because I was 17 years old and the person I was married to was very jealous of my relationship with music. He was very jealous. He would forbid me listening to certain records and things like that. He was that controlling. So I finally managed to escape him when I was 21, and that's when my life started. I escaped him at 21 and moved a short distance away to Hollywood with a roommate, and started studying. I got books on
Right.
electronics and studio design, and I bought the book Modern Recording Techniques, and I began studying, got an entry-level job, and I haven't stopped. And that was
No.
1978, and I'm still going.
Yes. My God, your 70s was very strange then. From 73 to 77, this was your married life. And that was, yes, not sort of particularly free and easy listening to whatever was happening.
No, yeah, I remember, I remember giving the person I was married to. I don't even like to say his name, which is okay when you're married to a real bastard. If you're married to
Yes.
someone who's a good man, then there's regret and pain there, which is why I say it was kind of a good thing because he ended up being horrible. And when you're with someone who's just absolutely unequivocally horrible, you don't have to feel any regrets for leaving. In any event, I remember giving him a list of records I would like to have had for Christmas. Instead, he bought me a radio because he said all the records are in there.
Right.
It's a way of saying I control you. I decide what you like and you dislike. So yeah, that was it.
Yes. My God. So 77 in Hollywood, 78. So, I mean, music had been changing quite a lot during that kind of decade of, the 60s had come, crashing to an end with so many deaths and kind of things kind of ending kind of quite badly, especially in San Francisco, the West Coast, there being the Charles Manson murders and, there was Nixon, Watergate, Vietnam. So, things weren't that great. And obviously, bands, a lot of bands I found or have found have kind of got a bit of a 5-year narrative of getting together, the
So true.
honeymoon period, the single, an album. Wow, this is great. Tour, second album, not so, possibly great. Third album, 5 years, 6 years in now, and it's like, oh dear, this is not going well. So, it's interesting how quickly, glam rock finishes, prog rock's there, that kind of dies. Then punk rock happens, then so on and so forth. So when you sort of got your freedom back in 77, 78, where did you go to musically from there?
I was just running errands a little while ago. I had the radio on, and uh, do you know the song "Car Wash" by Rose?
Yes, Rolls Royce.
Yes, and I love that movie, and I love that track by the great producer Norman Whitfield. Vocalist was Joyce Kennedy, and it was disco, right? And I remember I ended up working for Crosby, Stills and Nash before Prince. Graham Nash owned a recording studio called Rudy Records, and I was their studio maintenance tech. And so we would see, and it sounds like a parenthetical, but I'm coming back to answer your question. It was Los Angeles. It was the late 70s. We would see in that studio, of course, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, but we also saw the Eagles and Bonnie Raitt and people who were associated with the LA soft rock scene of that time. Personally, I was into Devo. I was into punk. I loved the Sex Pistols. I was really into disco. And of course, my usual funk and soul, which is why I was a Prince fan when he came along. But back to what I started saying, I heard Car Wash on the radio, and I remember one of those LA studio musicians coming into the studio one day at Crosby, Stills, and Nash's place, and he was so angry, and he said, "Who was the first asshole who decided that the hi-hat should be louder than the snare?" These guys hated disco, hated disco. And of course, they regarded punk as not being music at all. For me, I appreciated what Joni Mitchell and Neil Young and Graham Nash and all those people did with that scene. Linda Ronstadt and the Eagles came out of there. I appreciated that scene, but I was a little younger, and punk, disco, and the new music movements, new wave, Talking Heads,
Yes.
Blondie, that the Cars, that sort of thing coming up, just felt, it felt like my music, as it should. It was the music of my era, that 5 year period you're talking about. I was right in the heart of that at that time.
Yes, it's interesting. So was it lyrics or was it melody that would often grab you with a song? Which was the one that, what was the thing that particularly resonated? Because I can remember, at a very young age, I loved the Carpenters. I loved the lyrics of the Carpenters. They came there. Even, and there was like Harry Nilsson, I Can't Live If Living Is Without You. And there was Tony Jacks doing Seasons in the Sun, which was a sad song that I think Jacques Brel had written about, dying, basically. It was a lot about dying, death and alienation and having a loveless life, which seemed to sort of resonate as a 10-year-old in my life. That's why I think later on in the 80s, I often would say, that's why I like Joy Division and the Smiths, and romantic melancholia always kind of I enjoyed, or sort of, it was my go-to safe space. What was kind of what was the thing that would trigger your emotional connection?
It's always rhythm for me first. It's my favorite drummer was the late great Al Jackson Jr. on those Stax records. When I was young and had birthday money or babysitting money and could buy 45s, I just loved the 45s coming out of Stax. I loved Booker T and the MGs with Al
Yes.
on drums, with Duck Dunn on bass, Steve Cropper on guitar. Rhythm is, as Prince used to call it, the street I live on. I'm going to listen for the rhythm first. And if the rhythm gets me, I'm all in. I'm all in. If not, if it's something like a rock piece or something that isn't rhythmically the street I live on, then melody and tonality, harmony, second. I love close harmony. I love the Everly Brothers. Love the
Yes.
Boys, the tight harmony. And the Carpenters, of course, melody. They wrote great melodies. Richard Carpenter, good on him, he wrote great melodies. Melody second. Lyrics, when rhythm and melody are not the record's strong suit, then for me, like for a lot of listeners, the lyrics do need to be really original and great. So Bob Dylan, of course I love Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and the great lyric writers, but it's got to be that top 1% because I'm listening for rhythm and melody first.
Yes. So working in Rudy Records as a tape, what is a maintenance tech, by the
Maintenance
way?
tech is the person who is responsible for repairing the equipment. So being female, I really honestly did not believe that there would be a position for me as a recording engineer, and heaven forbid that there would be a position for me as a record producer because I'm a non-musician. It just seemed like saying that I would be an astronaut. But there was something I could do that wouldn't depend on my gender, and that's of course learn electronics and learn signal flow, learn to read schematics and how to solder, and do component repair on consoles and tape machines. The first company I went to work for was called Audio Industries, right there in the heart of Hollywood. And they helped train me up. I did a lot of studying on my own, but they taught me to repair consoles and tape machines. That's what I was doing in the greater Los Angeles area.
Right.
And Rudy Records is a one-room studio, but the equipment would break down a lot. Those late night sessions with cocaine and all the other bacchanalia that would go on in the late 70s. And they
Yes.
said, come work for us, come work for us. So eventually I said yes. And that's what I did. Every now and then, if our regular tape op was busy with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, they were making the Daylight Again album. So they were really busy. They would occasionally go to a larger studio to work. And then sometimes I would tape op for other clients who would come in, but not that often. When I joined Prince in '83, I joined him as a studio technician. He put me in the engineering chair.
Yes, because I remember watching a documentary film on, was it Beats Music with Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine? And he was quite a street hustler from New York who got that break with John Lennon in that studio and suddenly wasn't going to leave the studio at any cost. So that if any break came, he would be the person who did it. Were you a young hustler at this stage?
Hmm, interesting question, because I think about my students who come to college and they want these careers as record makers very badly, and some of them make it and some don't. Sometimes the ones who don't, they just don't want it badly enough. But there are some who want it desperately and they don't achieve it. And one of the things that holds them back is that they're unwilling to do the sort of hustle that's necessary. You have to make yourself a member of a community. You can't think that your talent is going to attract people to you. It doesn't work like that. You have to join a working community of record makers and kind of wait your turn in that room by working your ass off to finally be handed the steering wheel. If you're unwilling to join that community, you're going to have a much harder time of it.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I've done quite a few interviews now. I was just thinking, talking to you, producers who went on to do work with, those kind of iconic, kind of famous albums, and they all were, the young kid in the studio making cups of tea, just being there when some moment came, and it's like, oh, would you like to do this? And there was a guy called Clive Langer who did lots of work in he's done lots of work, but he was in a band called Deaf School, and then Alan Winstanley and Clive Langer, they were quite famous. A guy called Mark Saunders, then Tim Palmer and various other people. But they all started at the very slightly being in a band or just being an op, and then suddenly got that break of, oh, yes, just literally being the person who, one guy who did the recording of Band Aid, Do They Know It's Christmas? He was the engineer on that one. And again, this young kid, and when you look at this documentary, you wonder who this young kid is. And I was watching it thinking, I must get an interview with him. And again, he was the young person who just wanted to be around. He was good on vocals, for setting up the vocals and did that session. But again, it was they weren't, hustling, but they might not have been hustlers, but they weren't going to leave the studio if they could, could just stay there.
That's a lot more doable for people who look the part, meaning young men. It's if the vast majority of record makers in the technical skills as the producers and the engineers are male, and they're quite naturally, I don't fault anyone for this, more eager to pass the baton onto a young apprentice who looks like them, because you can relate to someone who looks like you. It's just Mother Nature's way. So if you're a young female in the studio, especially in the era when I came up, you had to have a skill set that showed that you were serious and that indicated that you were in the studio for the right reasons, not to meet a husband or anything like that. In hindsight, it ended up being really smart that I started my career as a studio technician, because in those cases, I would come into the room when everybody else stopped, and I was there for a reason, which was to repair the equipment. That gave me a huge amount of cachet, so that it would be more likely that that baton would get passed to me, because I had worked so hard. I wasn't just making the tea and delivering sandwiches. I was repairing their equipment so that the studio and the session could continue. It's just kind of something that those of us who are outsiders have to do if we're going to weave our way into the system.
Yeah, so was it, when you mentioned about fixing, were you good on a soldering iron? Was it that kind of level of fixing things?
Oh, yeah. Back in those days, today everything is converted from analog to digital. So we're not doing component level repair. Today it's more like card swapping. But back in those days, you just, let's say a channel strip on the console is out. All right, you pull it out, you put it on an extender board, you fire the console back up, and you lay out your schematics, and you got your oscilloscope there, and with the leads and the little clipper thing on the end, and you just trace the signal flow from input to output, and you see what component has died, and you're tracing that signal flow, so you have to know your basic electronics. You have to understand where the electrons are flowing, and you trace that signal flow, and you realize, oh, bammo, there it is. This part is out. Pull the thing out, swap out the component, and off you go. It was
You make it sound so easy, but obviously you must have so do you love logic, and as in thinking, you like the way people, you receive language in a way that you don't read other things into it. You like things to be precise.
I'm cut from that cloth, which is why, turns out, I've been successful as a neuroscientist, because understanding signal flow in the brain and circuitry in the brain and assemblies and things like that is not unlike understanding an assembly of electronic components that modify signals and route signals and things like that. It's a service-oriented profession. If you're going to be a record maker, you are serving the art and the science of making a record. So you find a place for yourself and contribute what you can contribute.
Yes, well, that's amazing. So as we trucked in from that exciting period of the late 70s, where you were working with kind of artists who probably had their glory period, really, hadn't they? Like Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young. No, not Young. Actually, he was still doing. But they slightly had their kind of moment, and then obviously punk wasn't going to be kind to those old men. And then you had disco, and then there was that post-punk scene and hardcore, and then politically things change as well. You have Reagan in the 80s, we have Thatcher. How do you then navigate your early 80s at this period?
Right. Yeah, it's true. I'm very fortunate that I had a chance to see and know Graham and Stephen Stills and David Crosby as well. David was in a rough period then in the early 80s. He was really heavily addicted to freebase. It was a rough time. And Stephen, he had his issues, and Graham was the sober fellow in the group. And it was interesting to see what the music business had delivered to them. I remember Graham's 40th birthday party. And now, he seemed old then. In fact, the whole theme of the birthday party was old people. And his wife had all the people who attended this birthday party, we had to dress as if we were in our 80s. And Graham's wife, Susan at the time was her name, she served nothing but soft food. So it was the whole theme was old age. He was turning 40, and that seems so young to me now.
I know. When I was growing up, you thought, God, Bowie was 30 or 35, and Paul McCartney was, and you're thinking, we thought of them as old, and you look back and go, oh my God, they were so young.
Yes. So I got to see what happens to the toddler after he is born in fame. Their early years, they were huge. Crosby, Stills, and Nash, huge. And the bloom was kind of going off the rose, to use another metaphor. And then I joined Prince, and he's a young star that is ascending. As you said, this is painfully true. If you have a 5-year run of hit records in the music business, that's as good as it gets for nearly everyone. Sometimes you're the Rolling Stones and you can go longer, but you have to wait out that period where you're no longer hip. So I was seeing Crosby, Stills, and Nash as they're getting into an era where they recognize we're 40 years old and we might be done. Then later I would see Prince as he was reading the handwriting on the wall just as he turned 30 and realizing I might have to go underground for a little bit. And time will tell if I'm going to be a legacy artist or not.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Yes, that must be. Yes, a lot of the bands that I've done, there's a particular circuit in the UK. There's the small clubs, 200, 300. Then they do the next tour. It's a little bit bigger, and then a little bit bigger, and things are going well. But how can they manage that controlled decline when they don't want to have a decline, and they don't want to go back to where they came from? But it's like they have to make that decision. Is it the case we're going to have to get a new career, which often they realise after a while, actually, we haven't got another career, have we? So that's the only thing.
Logical wall. And what's interesting is that the pure dyed-in-the-wool artists manage it. David Bowie managed it. David Byrne has managed it. There are artists who have enough intrinsic artistry and that high native intelligence, and they can read the trends, the cultural trends, and they can figure out a way to make a contribution in the current trend. In other words, they make music in the trend that is, rather than trying to pull culture over to where they are. Just join the crowd and make music for this time, not for your time. I admire the artists that are savvy enough to pull that off.
Yes, it's an interesting one because actually two people I love was David Bowie, and born the same year was Lemmy from Motorhead, and both of them stayed with music to the very end. And they both sort of, you must have realised that sometimes it wasn't going well. So with Lemmy from Motorhead, there was definitely a moment that he was in Hawkwind, that was successful, gets kicked out. Motorhead, very successful after 3 albums, but then problem, and then just realised actually this is my job. I'm going to just do an album tour until it's I'm dead basically, which he did. And it's like, okay, I'll just have to rely on the Germany, as our base crowd, or I'll have to, I'll just have to get out there and do it regardless and not overthink it. And eventually goes through a few decades where it's not that fashionable to then being fashionable again and just, working it out.
Make music for the audience you have, not for the audience you want to have. And the audience you have is increasingly going to be the nostalgia crowd. The people who come to see the Eagles are reliving old memories. And not that long ago, the people who would come to Rolling Stones concerts, a lot of them are there to relive old memories. But every now and then you see a lot of younger people who want to get a chance to see the Rolling Stones.
Yes.
Iconic. If you can just hang in there as an artist and get through the tide going out, sometimes the wave is going to come and carry you back to shore. And at that point, you're going to be a legacy artist. You'll be a nostalgia artist. Prince was okay with that. During the 90s, it wasn't his peak period. He knew the tide pulled him out. Rap and hip hop are the main wave now. And there's no way his funk dance music is going to compete with rap and hip hop. It's not going to happen. He let that tide pull him out, continued to make music, and then waited until the early 2000s when he could, at the Forum in Los Angeles, which seats 14,000 people, he sold out 21 nights.
Right.
21 nights sold out at an arena in Los Angeles as a legacy artist.
Yes, well, that is impressive. So then, how do you go from Rudy Recording Studios to Minneapolis? How does that transition go? Were you feeling it was time to sort of hit, not jump ship, but have a change from?
No, not at all. I had only been in it 5 years. I started in 78 and this was now 83. So only 5 years. And I was good at my job and I liked my job. But I got a phone call from a dear friend, a former boyfriend at Westlake Audio, and he had his thick Boston accent. And he said, "Sue, your dream job is waiting for you. Prince is looking for a technician." John knew that I was a huge Prince fan. He was my favorite artist. And the call had gone out through the professional grapevine in LA that Prince wanted to hire a full-time audio technician. Now, none of those techs in Los Angeles are going to leave LA, the entertainment capital of the United States, and move to Minnesota, out in the country. Not going to happen. But as soon as John heard this position was available, he called me and I said, tell them that they've found their technician. It's going to be me. It's me. They want me. I'll interview with them. They're going to hire me. I'm going. And I think I was the only one who applied. I don't think anyone wanted that job.
My God, you actually applied.
Well, I got connected with his management, and they set up an interview, and I sat down with Steve Farnoli in L.A., Prince's manager, and he asked me some questions, and he made me an offer, and I said okay, and I packed my bags, and off I went.
Blimey, that's very exciting. See, this was it Minneapolis?
Yes.
Right, okay, because I know one of my favourite other bands were from the 80s, Husker Du, were from there as well, so I became very keen. Yeah, so then what was it? What was your sort of first couple of weeks, months like working in, were the studios all set up that Prince had?
No, not at all. No, this was years before Paisley Park Studios, and I don't think He didn't even have plans for Paisley Park Studios. So he had just a regular suburban home, a rather nice one, but it was no mansion, not by any stretch of the imagination. He had just come off the 1999 tour. He'd had his first crossover single, so he was heading into superstardom. At this point, he was a star, but not at all a superstar. He had gotten the green light to do the Purple Rain movie, which was a semi-autobiographical movie about his life, and he's
Yes.
24 years old. What 24-year-old says, it's time to make a movie of my life? You would think only someone with a deluded ego, but his ego was appropriately sized for his talent. So he was planning on doing the Purple Rain movie and, of course, the album, and he needed a full-time technician. I worked with him in a little bedroom studio, no bigger than the little room I'm in right now, and then also at rehearsal in Minnesota. We recorded at rehearsal, and he liked flying out to Los Angeles and work at a proper studio, Sunset Sound, right on Sunset Boulevard in Los Angeles. So that's where we
Right.
did our work.
Yes. So at that stage, did you get to hear the process of the tracks that made onto Purple Rain?
Yes, he and the Revolution recorded a live concert at a little club called First Avenue, made famous in the Purple Rain movie. They recorded the show that night, and I had been hired by him, but I was just packing my bags. I hadn't yet arrived in Minnesota, so I wasn't there, unfortunately, for that recording. But at that live recording, recorded with a mobile truck from New York, they did the bed tracks for what would be Purple Rain, I Would Die for You, Baby I'm a Star. Those three. They did more, a lot more songs that night, but those three basic tracks ended up on the album. Other things we recorded at rehearsal. Let's Go Crazy was recorded at rehearsal. Darling Nikki had been fully recorded by Prince at home when I joined him. I really regret that I couldn't have been there for that one, but that one was
Yes.
done. Other things I did included Beautiful Ones and Windows Cry and Computer Blue and things like that. Either recorded, he tried them out a couple of places. So at home, at the warehouse, and also at Sunset Sound
My
Studios.
God, that must have been. Did you realize that you were surfing the zeitgeist at this stage?
When you're young and you've got a big ego like I'm saying we, meaning everyone in his circle, then we thought we were doing something important, but you don't know. You're too young to know. It feels like it's great, but you haven't lived long enough to know what great is or what the critics are going to say, what the audience is going to say. Um, Prince felt that the Purple Rain movie and album would be successful, but I can honestly say he didn't know for sure.
No.
You just have to release it and see what's going to happen.
Yes.
You also bear in mind that while you're working that hard in the studio, so's your competition. So is Michael Jackson. So is Madonna. Madonna was coming up really fast. So is Bruce Springsteen. So are these other artists. And there's Depeche Mode, and there are so many other artists who are turning out records also at their peak. And who knows? You put something out, and the very next day, your competition puts something out that the public loves more. So you never know.
Yes. And then I suppose MTV was coming along at this stage as well, wasn't it? Or was that a bit early for MTV?
No,
Or
MTV had started in the I think maybe 1980 or so, 81 maybe. So yes, it was important then.
yes. So then after that, did you get a kind of did the manager say or management say you've got a contract for a year, or was it just how does it work in the world of showbiz? And
For me, it was just I was hired. I was a full-time employee, and I got my paycheck like everybody else, once a week or every other week, whatever it was.
yes. So when you sat down to record the follow-up around the world, what was that? What was the atmosphere like with the sort of the creative process at this stage? Because obviously, Purple Rain is massive. I even went to the cinema to see it, which was quite boggling. Because I was at that stage, I was still on the fence about Prince, by the way. But I will confess more as we go on. So what was it? What was it like at this stage with the tricky follow-up album?
Well, now it's It's worth mentioning how different Prince was methodologically from everyone else. So typically, what you do is you get your advance from the record label. By you, I mean bands, artists. You interview producers. You decide on a producer. You and the producer, the band. You do your pre-production. You do your rehearsal. You go into the recording studio. You take 3 months, 6 months, in some cases longer. You make your album. And as you're wrapping up the album, you're planning your tour, and then you tour. And near the end of the tour, you're planning on taking a little rest. You want to take a holiday, and then you start planning your next album. Prince didn't work like that. If Prince was awake, he wanted to have a musical instrument under his fingers. And if he was playing an instrument, piano, guitar, whatever it was, he wanted to be recording. So what that means is Prince recorded constantly. There was no official start date for any album, and there was barely even an end date. So what happened was the tracks that we recorded or that ended up on Around the World in a Day were being recorded simultaneously along with tracks that appeared on the Purple Rain album, because he was always working. So before Purple Rain, the movie and the album were released, Around the World in a Day was, for all intents and purposes, done.
Right.
Had all these pieces recorded. All he had to do was sequence them together. So he was kind of waiting to see how Purple Rain was going to do. And then he had a theme afterward. Once he saw how it was going to do and that it was successful, we could go on tour. He could formulate a theme, color scheme for the album artwork, and just a basic notion around which the next album would take place. He was constantly rolling the ball forward. He never picked it up and stopped it from moving. It was constantly moving.
Yes, God, it's extraordinary. Yes, well, yes, his work rate was stuff. So at this stage, then Parade comes out. Is that a similar process again?
Parade was a little bit different because Around the World in a Day quite naturally didn't do as well as Purple Rain. Why would it? You know, how often do you make something that's called a masterpiece? The Purple Rain album was #1 on the Billboard charts for 24 weeks, coming up on half a year. So that's a rare feat.
Yes.
And he hadn't put as much thought into Around the World in a Day because, it was just a follow-up. He didn't know how it was going to do. So after Around the World in a Day, he needed to regroup, and he decided he wanted to make another movie. And in this regrouping process, this is interesting to me, he needed to figure out what the aesthetic was going to be. Just like David Bowie did. Every album has got a certain look, and you're going to wear your hair a certain way, and the clothing that you wear on tour to support this record is going to be a certain kind of clothing, and the backdrop's going to be a certain way. Now, he had transitioned really successfully from his second album, which was called Prince, to his third album, Dirty Mind, by going with a totally black and white art school kind of concept. He did the same thing when he transitioned from the very colorful Around the World in a Day to black and white for the Parade movie, Under the Cherry Moon, and the Parade album. So we went black and white, and he put more conscientious and careful effort into the songs on Parade because they were going to accompany the soundtrack of this movie.
Yes.
As Purple Rain did for the Purple Rain movie.
And how did it feel as exciting at this stage, that album? Because I think it didn't get quite so well reviewed, and there's a little bit more hit and miss on his creative moment here.
Yeah, it's great stuff on that record. He was shifting gears, as every artist does after you've had a hugely successful record. He was also experiencing just some personal issues that made it harder to find a source of exuberant joy for inspiration. Now, Purple Rain, the album, is an explosion of a young man who feels that he's on top of the world. And Around the World in a Day is an expression of a young man who's so happy to be on top of the world. But how long can you sustain that?
Yes.
The Parade album had to reflect a little bit what was going on with him, and he wasn't good about showing his vulnerabilities lyrically. He really, really wasn't into it. So he's feeling some stress at this time. He's engaged to marry Wendy Melvoin's twin sister, Susanna Melvoin, and that engagement, it was broken off by the time of the Sign of the Times album. The revolution was starting to fall apart because Wendy and Lisa were pulling away. They wanted to leave. So there were tensions in the band. There were tensions in his personal life. And he didn't quite have the warmed up muscle for expressing tension and vulnerability on record. I can hear just a little bit, a whiff of insincerity in some of the happier songs. You know what's going on with him on lyrics like "Do You Lie?"
Right.
You know what's going on with him, but he's not willing to necessarily express that musically.
No, he's not like Morrissey then in his lyrics, is he?
Not at all. Not at all.
No, I do. I mean, the songs that really stood out for me was I loved Girls and Boys, but I loved Life Can Be So Nice.
Yeah.
Was, that had a really driving energy to it, which was like, yes, and you couldn't avoid Kiss, but I really liked those two ones. But again, the album was, I suppose it was just a little bit more patchy as a piece, but
a little bit. Yeah, he was happy. He was in love. Life can be so nice. He means what he says. He was happy and in love, but there were tensions there. I remember sometimes Susanna would be wearing the engagement ring, and other times Prince would be wearing it on a chain around his neck, and they were going back and forth, back and forth. He liked the idea of marriage. He liked the idea of commitment, but actually pulling it off was something he just wasn't quite ready for. And Susanna she's a really smart woman, and she could see the handwriting on the wall, and she knew he was reluctant here.
Yes. So then after that, so where are you with this journey at this point? Are you still with the Prince stable?
Oh, yes. I mean, I was his full-time employee, so it's not like I just worked with him on records. I worked with him every day.
Yes.
Recorded.
Were you getting burnt out at this stage?
Not yet. Not quite yet. No, still I'm working with my favorite artist, and we're selling a lot of records, and I'm working as hard as I possibly can to keep up and be what he needs me to be.
Yes.
That was all consuming.
So Sign of the Times is the album that I commit to Prince, by the way. So that's the one I bought. And then I saw him on the Love Sexy tour. I saw him at the NEC in Birmingham and again in London towards the early 90s. So then that's when I was unsure, confession time. I thought, is this guy just want to be Hendrix? Is he as funky as James Brown? Is he a fake? Is he a phony? I was young. And then I thought, no, I love it. And then I bought Sign of the Times around the same time I bought Husker Du's, Warehouse album. I thought, God, it's all happening in Minneapolis, isn't it? And 87, I still think is one of the great years of music, actually. So I'm putting it out there now. So
that was a transition period, because at that point it became pretty clear that hip hop was not a flash in the pan, and that rap was definitely going to dominate by changing rhythm. The hip hop beat was very different from the disco beat, very different from soul and funk. It was going to be something totally new, and there was going to be much, much more emphasis on bass and drums and on something that's a little bit amelodic, something that is a little bit more monotone, but it involves percussive lyric delivery. And that's not what Prince did. It's not what Michael Jackson did either. So a lot of artists found that, it's adapt or die, and Prince wasn't going to do rap. That wasn't going to happen.
No, well,
he could tell the winds were blowing in a new direction. By the time he did Sign of the Times, he could tell.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember I was obsessed with this DJ in the UK called John Peel. So he introduced us to, he was just very good at introducing us to all this new stuff. So, that early rap stuff with Public Enemy and LL Cool J and stuff on, all these independent artists like Roxy Shante and The Real Roxanne. And there was a compilation collection came out called Street Sounds that just was brilliant at getting, I don't know, 8 I don't know, 12, 14 really good songs. The albums were often terrible by the artist, but they would have one good song that would go on this collection. And the production, there was Salt and Pepper, wasn't it? It was very kind of, it was not very, it was early. And the equipment was always breaking. It did sound terrible live, didn't it, at that stage?
Yeah, I think I've only been to one rap show concert. I love Public Enemy. I love Chuck D as a lyric writer. I really love Chuck D. And I love the Bomb Squad, Hank and Keith Shockley. Hank Shockley has become, I won't say a friend because we don't see each other that often, but I know him well enough. Know him and love him and admire the hell out of him. I admire the production techniques. It was never the musical street I lived on.
No. So yes, Sign of the Times, this epic moment that suddenly it explodes for Prince at this point. What was it then like at this stage of him putting this new album together?
That was a transition period. He was approaching 30, which is big for a young rock star.
Yes.
Not in his 20s anymore. He had finally ended his relationship with Susanna Melvoin, and they were dear, dear friends. And that had been an important relationship to him. He loved her very, very much, and did, I think, for the rest of his life. And she loved him too. The revolution broke up. He lost one of his oldest, dearest friends, Bobby Z. Wendy and Lisa, whom he relied on so heavily, they were gone. And now he had Sheila E. in her band. And Sheila's band and Sheila musically, they're from Northern California. They were from Oakland, Tower Power and all that, closer to the San Francisco Bay Area. Their funk style was much harder hitting. So if Prince is going to tour the Sign of the Times album, he needs to compose and arrange and perform pieces that are going to show off Sheila and her band, because he no longer has the lighter touch of Wendy and Lisa.
Yes.
He no longer has Bobby on drums. So his music had to change, his life had to change, his social circle had to change. There was a lot going on right then. The fact that that young man could, in that time, create not only a double album, but a double album that's considered a masterpiece, hats off. Hats off to that guy. I can't think of other examples of artists who, in a tough time period like that, did a work that's great and that holds up over the years, over the decades. You can play that record today and that record holds up.
Yes, well, the variety of styles is amazing. And actually, I do remember John Peel, who used to always like to have new artists and obscure things. He did play Sign of the Times, the track, because it was such a, God, that's quite an amazing song. And to come out with something like that was, it was just like, well, that resonates, because obviously we, can remember, if we were old enough, that whole thing about AIDS in the 80s. Even, all over the world, really. So, that was quite stunning. And then he obviously is just one of these epic albums, a double album, which is just full of variety and excitement. So, yes, well, so what was it like up close watching this process?
I have to say, when I think about it, just a little bit sad. I think he was a little bit sad. And as I said a moment ago, he didn't like to show that. He really didn't like to show that. When he got sad, he'd get very quiet. He was just very quiet. He was not forthcoming, not in studio anyway. I don't know what he was like as a boyfriend or as a friend.
Yes.
I didn't have a relationship with him. But in the studio, he put his head down and he worked day in, day out. That was his comfort zone. And of course, he dated. Sheena Easton was around that time. I don't know if they were romantically involved or not, but there were others. There were people around. He didn't lack companionship, but he was a little bit more closed off and alone, I would say, during that time period. In my role, my job was simply to facilitate his ideas. If he's performing, I better be capturing what he's doing, getting it onto tape, getting it back off tape, getting it through the console, and getting these things captured and cataloged and labeled and formatted correctly, so that the train can keep rolling. And that's what
That's just boggling, the thought of what you experienced. Yeah, because those tracks, especially on side 3, if I were your girlfriend and strange relationship, and I could never take the place of your man, that I thought that was the strongest side. Actually, it also has You Got the Look as well, and that really holds together well, that particular side of music for vinyl.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We worked really hard on those. You Got the Look was exceptional for how long it took. Originally, it was a slower groove, and we worked on that for a whole day. And it turns out we worked on it during one of America's biggest national holidays, over Thanksgiving, which for most people it's a 4-day weekend. Thanksgiving's always on a Thursday, so you got Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We didn't take days off with Prince, but we were in the studio on that Thanksgiving day, and then the Friday and the Saturday and the Sunday, because we did a whole track of You Got the Look at a slow tempo, and he decided, nope, it's not right. Stripped off the whole top line, everything, kept just the drums, sped up the tape machine, get those drums to be much faster, and then redid it. Left the drums, but did everything else all the way up to the top. And then had Sheena come in and do a vocal on it as well with him.
Yes, it's funny because when I was growing up in the 70s, there was a program that was done by Esther Ransom, and it was like almost a talent show, an early talent show of sort of taking someone completely obscure and putting them through this kind of potential of becoming a pop star. This was like 1970 something. I don't know. Did you ever come across the story of Sheena Easton? Yes, because so Esther Ransom had this program. Yes, it was recorded. It was called The Big Time, and it was something. It ran from 1976 to 1980, and she was on it as this young little Scottish girl working probably in a factory. And they said, oh, yeah, and so there was a program called. Yes, The Big Time. And she appeared on it and had that song, which was called Modern Girl and 9 to 5. And it's like, oh, that was very nice. And then she slightly disappears and then suddenly appears with Prince. And it's like, what's happened to Sheena East? And, it's like we were all a little bit shocked in this country because I think most of us grew up with her on this rather strange program.
She was great. I liked her. She came around a few times. We were at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles, and she came in to do the vocal part on You Got the Look, and I had set up the vocal mic, and Prince and I were in the control room, and Prince asked her, do you need any tea, or do you need to do a vocal warm-up? And she said, no, I don't need to do a vocal warm-up. I'm already warmed up. And he really smiled at that, and he looked at me, and he said, you see, Susan... He's always lecturing. You see, Susan, the real singers are always ready to go, always. And sure enough, I mean, she got out there on that mic and blew it away. Now, Prince was wrong. He was frequently wrong. Some years later, I worked with K.D. Lang very briefly, and K.D. Lang warmed up for 30 minutes to sing just 4 lines. So it's not true that the great singers don't warm up. But in this case, I mean, the pipes were just warm. She just went out and sang. She was the genuine article.
Yes, and the joy of youth, I guess, as well, wasn't it, really, at that stage? Then when that came out and it was such a big hit, did that change the whole dynamics of the working, Prince, the way he was working? Because suddenly he's on another level again, isn't he?
Yes, and at this point, Paisley Park Studios had opened, and now he can work a new way. Now, for the first time first time in his history, he's now got a complex that has more than one studio, so he can keep 3 rooms going at once. He can put Sheila in one room and put another band in another room, and then he can have Studio A, and he can really turn out the machinery of record making. Because as I was making records with him, we were also doing records by the Time and Apollonia 6 and Sheila E. and Protege bands, so he's working constantly.
Yes. I guess Glamorous Life had come out as well, hadn't it, at that stage?
Glamorous Life, a little bit earlier than 87. I remember. It was around the time of Around the World in a Day, so it might have been 84.
Right.
So. Glamorous Life, or maybe even 85. But anyway, yeah, he had this machine a factory that churned out albums, and now he had a facility where he could have more than one engineer and not just me. He can have a stable of engineers. It was time for us to part ways. He did go through a rough period around that time, a period of self-doubt, which created the Black Album. Of all the songs on the Black Album, I noticed I did all but one of them. The Black Album were, for the most part, those were songs that he and I recorded very quickly, in preparation for Sheila E.'s birthday party. He was throwing Sheila a big birthday party. If I recall, it was December. He was going to throw her a big birthday party and rent out a club in Los Angeles, and he wanted music to dance to. So if he wanted music to dance to, he'd do his own music. So we just did a bunch of songs just for fun. You know, we tossed out a few things, and he put them together into an album after R&B and Black radio did not necessarily embrace the Sign of the Times album, and that was disappointing to him. He had hoped that it would, that he would go back to his roots, and it was Black radio that launched him in the States, and they did not embrace necessarily the Sign of the Times album. So he put out the Black Album just to show, you see, I'm still funky, and then he realized, no, I've never made a reactive album in my life. I've always made proactive albums. I've always put out what I thought I should put out, and this is just a reaction. So he yanked it off the dock before releasing it.
God, that must have been... there was so much. I mean, no one would remember it now. I mean, it was one of those moments. It was the great mystery of the Black Album, wasn't it? Yes, but I guess you weren't surprised that it got sort of put back again or shelved.
Yeah, now that was just right around the time that I was leaving him. So it didn't exist as an album in the time I was with him. After I left, and Sign of the Times got the reception that it did, which was great in the critics circle, but not necessarily great on Black radio. That's when he had that knee-jerk reaction and decided, the Black Album, that's what I'm going to do, and then changed his mind. I wasn't his employee at that moment, but I was close enough with my friends who still were his employees that I heard the story.
Yes. And then so this was 88-ish. Did you, what happens next? Where's your next chapter? Where do you go from there?
I got a phone call that the Jacksons out in Los Angeles were looking for an engineer, and they knew that I was free. I was no longer working for Prince. So the first thing I did was an album called 2300 Jackson Street with the Jacksons out in the Jackson family compound, which was on Havenhurst Street in Encino, California. Michael lived there at the time because he was building Neverland, but he wasn't home at the time. He was on tour. I think he was on the Bad tour. So I stayed at the house and worked with Jackie and Jermaine mostly, with Randy a little bit. Tito, Marlon was around maybe once or twice. But yeah, I worked with the Jacksons for a few months. And then after that, I got a manager. I stayed in Los Angeles, and I did engineering on some records, mixing on others, and then production on others.
Blimey. There you go. So the 90s then. Again, it was quite interesting because I, being obsessed with Bowie, I realised, he did an album a year. During the 70s, he produced a few people's work, ish, did some films, relocated lots of live ones. And then his 80s work, it really feels quite painful at times, but fascinating as a what happened, to an artist when they're really there in one period. And then when you look at the next period, you think, not quite sure what happened there, David. And then he picks it up and, sort of gets going again a bit in the 90s, but definitely gets going a bit further. Did you sort of look at artists like that, sort of seeing a period where you think, oh, they did struggle? Because I noticed a lot of 70s artists, their 80s work is not that brilliant, and you can see that they feel a bit embarrassed by it. Did you ever sort of analyse or look at people's work like in a similar way?
Not so much when I was in the music business, which I was from 78 till the year 2000. Of course.
Because I suppose that in the way that you were there really in the 80s, but the 90s come and there's a new, sort of some new kids on the block. There's a new producers. I remember, Michael, oh God, what's his name? But he did Red Hot Chili Peppers and
Michael
Souls.
Bynum.
Yes. So I did, I interviewed him, and it was like, God, your 90s work. You were Mr. Ding. It was like the Midas touch, man. You were there. You created that sound virtually.
Sure. Yeah, we all have our sweet spots when the thing that we create just happens to match the appetite and the cultural times. For example, I don't know who said this, but I heard it years ago and it always stuck with me. In the United States, anyway, there's a difference in the female standard of beauty that seems to correlate with who's president. So what this author said was, when we have a conservative president like Ronald Reagan and George Bush, the female standard of beauty is almost cartoonish, almost like the porn star, the kind of look.
Sort of like Dallas and Dynasty?
I suppose, yes, that movies and television shows about great wealth are very popular when we have a conservative president or someone like Margaret Thatcher in office. The flip side is when we have a liberal president, Barack Obama, President Bill Clinton, during liberal times, the female standard of beauty is Kate Moss and grunge music and clothing that looks like you got it in a thrift store. So there's the downtown art, and then there's the uptown art. And it's the same thing for musical artists. You have to have your finger to the wind to see what the cultural appetite is. And then, of course, you have to be conscious of the fact that the youth coming up today are going to want something different. They don't want to listen to what their parents listen to, or even their own brothers and sisters. They're going to find their own thing. You are going to have to go underground. And there is no artist that I can name who has successfully been on top of genre changes or stylistic changes. Art just doesn't work like that. Not if it's genuine art. You have to just kind of be prepared to ride it out.
Yes, this is so true. I always remember watching a documentary, because I love music documentaries, on Rod Stewart, I think it was, and he said he was going through his career and got to the 80s and kind of wanted to skip it, and I thought, I bet he's talking about his personal life and all those relationships, and it wasn't. It was about the music. It was like, can we just miss that? Because it was, oh yeah, that were pretty awful. But he's so even he was aware, and it was interesting because I remember a lot of those artists who have that moment, that like Bowie in the 80s, it was almost like he was listening to what was happening, saying, oh, I better have that and I better have that, rather than what he kind of wanted. And it was almost like, oh, I need that guitar sound, I need that producer, can we get them up, go in that studio, rather than him being led by the heart, so to speak. It was more him thinking, oh, actually, I need to sort of employ the guys or the women who are going to make that sound that's on top of the pops at the moment. It's like, trouble is, by the time you've got there, that sound's kind of going to sound dated.
A lot of people do that just to kind of keep their careers alive and to stay out there. I can't say that there's anything wrong with that. My own career changed in the 1990s when I met Tommy Jordan and Greg Kurstin, the band Geggiton, and they were signed to David Byrne's label. And I heard their music in the office of a record executive, and the record executive said to me, you can't work with them because they can't afford you. They're on a little boutique label. They have no budget whatsoever. They could never afford you. But listen to this because it's really cool. And that year was 1992. And as soon as I heard that cassette, I realized, and I said to this record executive, oh, on the contrary, I must work with these guys, because I could hear that they musically were tuned to a radio station that I desperately wanted to listen to and know about. It was kind of like Prince, but it was a mirror image of Prince. So the record executive introduced me to Tommy and Greg, and I worked with them all the way through the remainder of the 90s. They were an odd little band. You might know the name Greg Kurstin because he's a hugely successful record producer. He co-wrote Adele's Hello and Easy on Me and produced those records with her. He won the Grammy for Producer of the Year in 2017 and 2018. He's been hugely successful with Kelly Clarkson and Sia.
Yes.
Sir Paul McCartney and all these people. But when I knew him, he was in his early 20s, and he was Geg. He was just Geg. He was the Geg of Geggy Ta, and Tommy was the Ta. And what they did and what they taught me to do, this is so beautiful. As Tommy put it, he said, Greg and I want to understand what music is. And because they were on such a little label and they had no budget, we worked at their home, Tommy's house, and what they did with music was pull it apart and stretch it and bend it and play with it, deconstruct it to understand what it actually is and how it works. Now, these two guys have had lots of musical training. Tommy was a composition major at Oberlin School of Music, and Greg studied jazz piano with Jackie Byard at the New School in New York. He went to Cal Arts in California. Loads and loads of education with these two young men, but they were deconstructing music to explore it for the love of experimentation and simply, purely for the art of music. And what I learned from them was that that's what I needed to do, is to, with all the artists I work with, explore what music is, which circles back to what I said at the beginning of our interview, what my strength is. I'm a really good listener. And I'm in touch with how music performances and sounds and arrangements affect me. So with all the artists that I worked with, including David Byrne, Barenaked Ladies, and Tricky, and many others, all I worried about was whether or not this worked for me as a selfish listener. And forget about commerce, forget about whether it's going to sell. It might not. Who knows? You can't predict. Not even Prince could predict. But what we do know is whether or not this is artistically pleasing. So that worked for me, and that got me enough success with a #1 record with Barenaked Ladies that I could leave the music business in 2000 and go to college and get a doctoral degree. Right. At that time, you hunker down and you make art that makes you really, really happy. And you're there, you know?
Yes. So did you also work with Edie Brickell as well?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Which one, what album did you work with her?
The less successful album. I was the engineer, and my friend, the producer Tony Berg, was the producer on that album. It's called Ghost of a Dog.
Right, because I remember I loved the first album. I knew that quite well because again, you get it and you sort of, this was the 80s. And then the second one, oh yeah, I do remember this one actually, that one, because it had Mama Help Me and He Said Ghost of a Dog. Yeah, it still had some great songs on it actually.
Tony's a great producer. Tony is great. And Tony has mentored a lot of very successful people in the music business. But Tony is from a Hollywood family. His father was a screenwriter, and his brothers are all successful in the entertainment industry. And Tony is one of those guys who produces art for the sake of art. And Tony's just never worried about whether or not the records he produces will be huge commercial hits. He just doesn't do that. He works with Phoebe Bridgers a lot these days. Tony makes art.
Right. There you go. Talking of art, Tricky though, he's quite out there because I did Mark Saunders was this producer I'd interviewed, and he I think worked on that first album in '99. He did actually, and he said he was quite bonkers. Actually, he had some quite amazing stories about Tricky, and so how did you?
Yeah, I worked with him in '97. That was one of the best experiences I ever had in the studio. So technically speaking, Tricky is a non-musician, and so am I. So
yes.
We're two non-musicians making a record together in the studio, and I really liked him so much. I enjoyed his company, his sense of humor. I found him a delight to work with. He, like Prince, gave me so much respect and authority and free rein. He let me express myself. He trusted me. He trusted my instincts. I had a great time with Tricky. I have deep fondness for him.
Yes, God, yes. I just remember, yes, it was just like, I think he was smoking quite a lot, wasn't he, at times?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
sure that.
I don't smoke, so I don't know. I don't know about that, but I know that that's just what he would do, and he'd be so cool because he'd come into the studio. I'd get there earlier. We were in New York City, and he'd come in, and first thing, he'd roll one of those English joints, I think, with tobacco in it, and like a big spliff, and I'd be playing the music. He'd take a big hit off of his joint, and he'd go wicked. I loved hearing the stories about what it was like when he grew up, and I don't know, I liked him very much.
Yes, well, I remember those first couple of albums. So then you go back to college or university, and you get your doctorate.
Mm.
So what was this? What was what was your subject? Well, not subject, but what was the kind of thesis or your
Uh,
dissertation?
I was. It wasn't going back to college. It was actually going to college for the very first time because I had left high school to get married
Yes.
at 17. So I had to do 4 years of undergrad. Then I went up to Montreal in Canada and got my PhD in a program in behavioral neuroscience, and I was studying music perception and cognition. My thesis was on the distinction between consonant and dissonant musical intervals in the brain, asking, what does the brain care? Does the brain consider the tritone to be the devil's chord and the perfect fifth to be so perfect? Um, yeah. Then after getting my PhD, I came to Berkeley to have an adult salary, a grown-up salary, as a professor. So I never did do a postdoc or anything like that. I went right into a teaching position.
Blimey, and you've been there ever since, or?
Sort of, kind of. So I started with them in 2008, and I left in 2022 to move out to the country, teach just for Berkeley online. I released a book called This Is What It Sounds Like, What the Music You
Yes.
Love Says About You in 2022. So now I'm writing a textbook, and I go on speaking engagements for this book, and I teach, and it keeps me busy.
Yes. Oh, that's just fascinating. So you've really gone down some interesting rabbit holes here, haven't you,
Oh,
of
yeah.
sort of learning about why we love music.
Love it so much. The science.
And have you sort of looked at the history of music and sort of thought about how that resonates with the consciousness of the human race during those different decades and centuries?
Unfortunately, no, that's not my wheelhouse. I just recently purchased the Oxford Companion to Music, that encyclopedia of all things musical. And I am learning more about the great composers in the history, but my main focus is the neuroscience of music perception, which is insanely complex and moving forward at a very fast clip. The neuroimaging tools that we have now have, talk about a tidal wave, have created a tidal wave of data on the musical brain, whether it's listening or performing or composing or being creative. There's a tremendous amount to learn if you're going to ride that wave. So that's about all I can manage right now.
Yes. Do you ever sort of think about music in the sense of when you listen to a bit of music and you think, wow, that's amazing, and another bit of music where it's all there, but it's just not there? Those songs that you just think, well, that's going to be here forever, and that's you've created it, you've got the ingredients, but there is not that something magic there.
It's so hard. And this is why to study this field is so exciting, because there are so many mysteries. Now, one of the great mysteries is individuality. Why does one person listen to a record and have it bring them to tears because they love it so much, and another person listens to it and says, not for me, nah, not so great. But then there's the mystery of what you just described, which every record producer would sure as hell love to solve, because you'd be on top of the world if you could. But how do you take these ingredients and put them together in such a way that you can recognize this is as good as it can possibly be? Now, a good producer is going to get you 95% of the way there, especially if you have a good song. It's pretty hard to mess it up. But there's that extra 5% that does seem to involve just some Well, it kind of seems to involve, in a mystic Muffet sort of way, uh, to say an alignment of the stars. I don't mean that literally, but it does involve a certain kind of alchemy that I think
Mm.
science has not explained yet. We do it all the time in the recording studio. We do everything right. You get the best musicians on a good song and great performers with a good mix, and you listen to it and you say, I know there's something missing. What's missing? I mean, the negative is hard to understand. You know that a great chef does that. A great chef is trying so hard to bring something amazing to the table, and it can be the difference in just that extra pinch of salt, or taking out that salt, or adding this herb and not that herb. A lot of mysteries there, and how
There
that all.
are, there are. Well, it's often, I mean, I don't know, every 10 years they think they get the budget to make a program where they're going to try and write that classic song or record the classic song as well. And so, you know, as one of those TV documentary things, so they get the producer at the time, they get this great band, they get a great songwriter, they get the producer, and, you know, they're all kind of names. And they, you know, you watch this documentary and they end up, you know, you watch the process and you end up with them playing it and you're thinking, this is so flat. Something is just, you know, yes, that's Mark Ronson, the go-to producer, that's the go-to writer, that's a song, great you know, great studio. And it's like, yeah, but you're never going to want to listen to this again. You're not going to go, oh.
Exactly. And then there's, you know, there are those star talents who are so far ahead of the others that we recognize their competition doesn't stand a chance. Adele is one. Amy Winehouse, where did that young woman come from? When you hear Amy Winehouse, you recognize good luck to
Yes.
all of you who think you can ring that bell the way that she did. That was no accident. She worked really hard to get to that point. So there's that. There's the talent that we're working with. Just like for a chef, there's the ingredients we're working with. If this one's got better tomatoes than that one, the sauce is going to be better for this one. The other thing, though, that we have to keep in mind is culture, the influence of culture and context. We know more today about the neurobiology of creativity and where that comes from. We have to start by defining creativity. How do
Mm-hmm.
you label something as creative? Vincent van Gogh and Emily Dickinson were not considered especially creative in their day. Emily Dickinson wasn't considered a great poet, and today she is. What's the difference? It's the exact same poems, but the culture around, the context in which we consume those poems differed over the years, over the decades. And likewise with music, sometimes a piece can be ahead of its time, and other times it just doesn't have a time. It's just below the bar. The bar is set much higher.
Yes. Well, it's interesting because there are a few artists. There was like Nick Drake, who was the singer-songwriter in
Oh,
the 70s, who probably sold about 50 copies and was like, don't actually, Nick, perhaps get another job. There was an album by the Zombies that I think they split up just as they finished it, and it was like suddenly 30 years later or 3 decades later, people started saying, this album, Oracle and something, is a masterpiece. And then they were going, perhaps I don't know what you're talking about. And then it's like, no, you guys need to reform again and play this album because it is so good. So it's interesting. There are some that are just there to be discovered later on, but at the time we didn't appreciate it.
right. Yeah, Nick Drake is iconic now, today, of course. That Zombies album, was that produced by Gus Dudgeon?
It might have been.
He worked with
Yes.
him early in his career, and then he went on and did all those great Elton John records. I think pound for pound, the late, great Gus Dudgeon probably sold more records as a producer than just about any other producer who ever lived. I worked with him years ago at Rudy Records. He was a lovely, lovely man.
Yes, I get. And do you find in those moments, though, that producer does contribute a lot to the atmosphere and the energy
Very
of
much.
those sessions?
Yeah, very much. Very much, very much. And when an artist finds the producer that they click with, like Elton John did with Gus Dudgeon, you tend to stick because the producer's job is, of course, to pull music out of the artist. You don't slap a style onto them like it's a coat of paint. You find the artistic seeds that they want to grow, and you pull that out. Unless, as you were talking about earlier, it's an artist who's made a conscious decision to say to the producer, I want your sound. T-Bone Burnett, Mark Ronson, Max Martin, whomever you may be, give me your sound, please, because I'm not really feeling inspired.
Well, in the 80s, we had Trevor Horn, who had a particular, like, wow, that's the Trevor Horn. Yeah, that's the 80s. That's
true,
dated so badly.
Yeah, it is too bad, isn't it? We often don't know. I loved those records that he made back then, though.
Yes, but they can only be, that period. Yeah, I mean, it was good, but it was like, wow, was it gated reverb that everyone got very excited by?
We all loved it. I had a heavy hand with that. Oh well, we liked it.
We
And
did.
You don't know. Is this going to be around forever? Is this a classic sound or not? We didn't know. In the days when I was working for Crosby, Stills and Nash at Rudy Records, we didn't know that tube microphones would make a comeback. You didn't know for sure because you had those nice, fairly new condenser microphones, the Neumann U87, and that was the hot stuff. Except that, now those 87s are not the hot stuff, and the tube mics have come roaring back in terms of popularity. So you don't know.
And did you sort of also appreciate people like, was it Delia Devonshire? The woman who's quite famous in the 50s and 60s as that producer of music and an engineer in the studio, Delia Devonshire.
Yeah, I'm afraid that I don't know. I've heard some of the names of some of the very early female producers, very few of them, very few.
Delia Derbyshire. I think they've done, films about her life because she worked at the BBC as an assistant studio manager and created quite sort of out there, far out sounds. And for that time was boggling. And obviously, it was just, again, didn't get appreciated until much later in life. So as you do. So looking at what's coming up there next then, did you say you're writing your new book or another book?
Textbook. It's just a textbook for students to use in class. It's a music cognition textbook. I was invited by Princeton University Press to write this book, and I eagerly said yes, and so I'm in the middle of that. And I teach music and neuroscience and psychoacoustics for Berkeley Online, and then I give talks that I often travel to.
Yes, well, I would imagine. I mean, it's been a fascinating, amazing period of music that you were so sort of on that zeitgeist, basically, wasn't it? To see so much kind of genius and so much interest happening.
I have been born under a lucky star, to work with such great artists, Prince and David Byrne and Tricky and the Jacksons and, of course, Crosby, Stills and Nash, and to know these people whose music I loved, and then get to be there with them to help bring their records into the world. That's pretty great. That's
yes. Pretty great. And have you been involved in the kind of Prince legacy and archive at all?
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. After he passed away, the estate, his estate was in a huge quandary, as well as in a huge mess. I mean, he didn't leave a will, and it was a mess. And then the issue then is, what do we release, and for whom, and who's going to make the money off of it? He was signed to different labels over the course of his career. Yes. Where are the tapes and all that? They hired a wonderful fellow named Michael Howe, record executive with Warner Brothers at that time, and they put Michael in charge, and he contacted me and others and asked about certain periods in Prince's recording life and asked, what do you imagine is in the vault, and are there any titles that haven't been released? And I contributed early in those days and did some writing, some liner notes for the Sign of the Times box set and the deluxe Purple Rain.
Amazing, yes.
Such as it is.
Have they managed, do you feel like they've kind of managed it well and it's in safe hands?
I believe it is. It was a mess initially. Michael Howe is one of the finest, I think he's the finest record executive I've ever worked with. So it was in great hands with Michael. The estate itself went through some ups and some spectacular downs. The folks who are managing Paisley Park now, Londell Macmillan, a lawyer who worked with Prince in the 2000s and in the late 1990s, Londell is in charge now, and they seem to be headed in the right direction. I was out there last summer, and things are moving in the right direction. It's a very tough problem to solve. You've got the core fans who want everything to remain exactly as it is, but you've also got young people who don't really know who Prince was. And personally, I think that's the audience to be targeting. Prince was an important musician in the history of popular music. He should be known by scholars. Scholars should have access to his archives, and young people should have materials that reveal who Prince was and what he was so great at. But they'll go the way it's going to go. It's in moderately good hands right now, and we'll see what the
Yes, because I know a few years ago, one of David Bowie's albums from the 80s a few tracks got remixed because it had that very 80s sound. And they weren't great songs, I don't think, in the first place, but they sounded actually better after this little bit of kind of remixing. Do you ever what do you feel about people having their work remixed after they're passed away? Do you think that's all right? Or do you think, it's a bit...
Here's what I think about that. When the artist is alive, they are chiefly responsible for their legacy, and they are responsible quite naturally for what gets released. They are in charge of their public image. Who else should be in charge but you, your public image? But after they're gone, I don't know that we have any mandate to make sure or to try to keep them in charge posthumously. I think the thing to do is to serve the legacy of the artist. And if there's any material that helps us understand this artist better and helps historians and scholars create a more accurate picture of that artist, that should be accessible. I would like to know a lot more about Jimi Hendrix and Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong and anybody who I consider to be great. If you've got material that helps us know these great artists a little bit more, we should have it, with the presumption that the only ones who are going to access it are people who respect them in the first place. In other words, I don't think releasing music is going to tear down any great artist's reputation. I don't see how it could.
No, absolutely. No, yes, we shouldn't. I mean, it was quite interesting. I remember when the cover band started to become popular, and then I remember feeling a bit like, I'm not sure about this. And then someone said, well, look, we listen to classical music performed by people from composers who've long died. So let's move away from this, but it was still, that was a bit of a grey area, because you thought, well, the band, they're still alive. How can you have a cover band, but though, it's like, well, it helps us to see or listen to the music being played live, and what the hell? Who cares?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a complicated issue. You can argue both sides, I think, very effectively. But I think ultimately what matters is the truth. I know that with Prince, everything he recorded and wasn't ready to release right now, it went into the vault. With only one exception, he didn't destroy it. It went into the vault, which means he was okay, I think, with someday pulling that off the shelf and either listening to it again himself or having other people listen to it. It's not like he was ashamed of it. It didn't go in the vault because he never wanted it heard again. It went in the vault just because he wasn't ready to release it. So I'm going to say, if there's material in the vault that we haven't heard, bring it out.
Fantastic. And just on that last bit, I was always interested in the vault. The vault, could it just be a nice cupboard, or is it... it's not like it's got gold, like the gold bars in a vault. Is it just a very good, secure unit somewhere?
It's a vault. Have you seen in films, we've seen bank vaults with a big steel door that's like a foot thick, with the round wheel in the front? That's it. It's a vault. It's in the basement of Paisley Park Studios. It serves double duty as a tornado shelter, because in the Midwest they get tornadoes. By 1995, they couldn't close the door anymore because the tapes were spilling out of it. It was so full. It's just rows of metal shelves, floor to ceiling, moderately high ceiling, just like you would see a bank vault in the movies.
Right.
That's what it looks like.
God, they need a good filer, don't they? They need someone who can get in there and sort it out. But God, yes, I like that image now.
Yeah, that was the mess he left behind. An overflowing vault. At Paisley Park Studios, he had an apartment there, an apartment for living quarters, a private apartment with an elevator that went down to the studios down below, and he had tapes piled all over that apartment. It was a real mess to go through because, as I said a little while ago, if he was awake, he wanted to have an instrument under his fingers, and if he had an instrument in his hands, he wanted to be recording it. When I was with him for over 4 years, we recorded every day on movie sets, on tour. We recorded videos of the concerts, and then we recorded the after parties where he would play. He was always recording. A lot of tape.
I mean, he did release an awful lot of stuff. Did you manage to kind of keep an ear out for everything that he was doing at that stage throughout the decades?
Somewhat. Of course, I'd be aware of new Prince releases, especially in the first few years after I left him. But there were memories there. Some of them were painful, and I needed to do what I set out to do, which was establish my identity as a record maker independently of him. So I wasn't the same fan I had been before I went to work for him, although I did love Diamonds and Pearls and the Batman soundtrack. Musicology I loved very much. There were pieces that came out that I really liked.
Yes, it was a bit random after a while, wasn't it? Did it take a while to sort of heal that feeling, or did you ever have any more communication, or was that?
I saw him. I would go to Paisley Park now and then to, people would want me to mix a record there or do something there at that studio. So I'd run into him. I ran into him on tour. That was the last time I saw him. I think it was the late 90s. And was always very friendly and very warm. I liked seeing him. I would send birthday greetings. But we didn't have any more of a professional relationship together. But the feeling was very amicable and warm.
Nice. Well, it's nice to feel like this. That's sort of, I don't know, the healing process is so important for our consciousness. And that's,
I was on a panel with another one of his engineers. This was at Paisley Park Studios for the yearly celebration. And Dylan Dresdow, an engineer who worked with Prince in the 2000s, was sitting next to me. And he said some really smart things. One of the things he said was, you had to unlearn Prince. Very wise. So people will often ask, so what did you learn from Prince that, you could use down the road with other artists? And the answer is essentially nothing, because Prince was so hyper creative, so fluent on so many different instruments. You couldn't take things you learned with Prince and apply them to other artists. You're not going to get, with another guitar player, Prince's guitar tone. You're not going to get his piano tone with another artist. You're not going to be able to arrange a record the way Prince did with another artist. You're not going to get the same vocal performance with another artist. You're certainly not going to get it as quickly. So you had to unlearn your expectations after you spent a good deal of time with Prince. I had unrealistic expectations because, for all intents and purposes, Prince was the first artist I ever worked with as an engineer. So I left Prince thinking, all right, well, that's how it's done. And I had to learn, no, that's not how it's done. That
right.
He's exceptional.
God, that's it's amazing. Well, look, Susan, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this. This has been an amazing insight into your kind of creative journey from beginning to now, and incredible story, amazing story. So yes, well, thank you for your time. It's been so enlightening. So yes, but I'll let you rock on, and thank you again. If you want, I can always send you the link, and then you could always use it elsewhere if you ever fancy it.
All right, well, I know where to find it, so I can find it. And it's really nice talking with you, David. So thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, look, take care and have a nice day. See you later.
Alrighty,
Bye-bye. Dear listener, is the end of the interview. Pretty obvious, really. Anyway, a massive thank you to Susan for giving me the time for that. This has been the C86 show. David Eastaugh. So if you want to contact me, you can on all those social media platform sites. Just do C86 show and my name. All these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and probably a few others. But let's not worry. Have a great week. Stay safe.